Alrighty, it's been a while since I've talked about old Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve. The Fed, last time we checked in with them, was still hiking rates, and expectedly, Powell is now walking it back. They are not going to continue full on ahead in Volcker mode, hiking at a clip of 75 basis points per meeting. Powell confirmed, all but confirmed, what was already outlined in the Fed minutes from the last meeting for, I guess, November, early November, that the Fed will be hiking at a slower pace moving forward. This is unsurprising. The Fed cannot keep this up forever. It doesn't matter to them what the rate of inflation was. Powell, for a few months there, he played the game. He wanted to be Mr. Hawk and say, oh, look, I'm serious about inflation. I'm going to fight inflation. And even though GDP hasn't taken a nosedive yet, we just got Q3 GDP data for this today, before Powell spoke, and it was at a 2.6% annualized rate of growth. Ordinarily, we would say, hey, that's okay. That's not the end of the world, considering that Powell is hiking rates at 75 basis points per meeting. But I think that Jerome knows that Wall Street was expecting him to say, you know what, the next hike's going to be 50 basis points. That's what they've priced in. And if he wants to surprise them, if he wants to be a real Santa Claus, if he wants to create a real miracle on 34th Street in New York City, or in this case, a miracle on Wall Street, it'll only be a 25 basis point hike, because since Wall Street is priced in a 50 basis point cut, or hike, excuse me, implicitly, that will be a 25 basis point rate cut. But Powell's not going to have to do that. The Santa rally comes every year. It comes without fail. Santa Claus is coming to town this year, and his name, even though he doesn't have a big white fluffy beard, he does have white hair. His name is Jay Powell. And so this is good news for the stock market, and that's about it. For the rest of us, does it make inflation go down? Does it make prices return to where they were a few years ago? No, prices only move in one direction, and that's up. And sure, if they move up too quickly all at once, in any given year, oh, well, the government frowns upon that, and they say, maybe we should tone things back a bit. But in the words of Jerome Powell, if you're going to keep hiking rates until inflation comes down, well, then you're just going to over-tighten. God forbid we wait for inflation to fall. God forbid we wait for prices to come down, because you know what? They might come down too much. Or, you know what? I'm sorry, because his goal is not to make prices come down. It's to make the rate of price increases come down. And if Powell, so-called over-tightens, if he keeps hiking rates, waiting for the rate of inflation, for the rate of the increase in the cost of living to come down, by golly, if he's not careful, the cost of living might actually go down a little bit for a couple months. If Powell's not careful, maybe next May, the cost of living might actually be cheaper than it was in April. But we know that's not going to happen. Powell would never let that happen. And so he's back to old Jerome. Jerome Volcker is dead. Jerome Powell has been resurrected by a bolt of lightning. And like Frankenstein's monster, he has risen from the grave, and he's on the hunt for human flesh. But not just any humans. He's on the hunt for your flesh. And he's going to use your life force to sustain and enhance the wealth of himself and everyone that he's ever known. That was the purpose that Jerome Powell feels that he was put on this earth for. And so what's the road ahead look like? Does it look cheery? Does it look fruitful? Does it look prosperous? Frankly, I have my doubts. Historically, the recession has only really gotten underway once the Fed has pivoted, once they have shifted from rate hikes to rate cuts. But honestly, at this point, Powell is quitting so early on in the game, before inflation, while inflation is still quite high, before inflation has come down anywhere near what we would consider a normal level for the past 40 years, Jerome Powell may be pivoting so quickly that he just keeps inflation alive. I mean, when asked what he was worried about, you know what he said he's worried about? He's worried that, you know what, if things keep on going the way they are, I'm worried that workers might start to ask for a wage. And then, you know what? Then inflation will get out of control. That's when inflation becomes a problem. Inflation's not a problem when the cost of living's going up, when prices of goods that you buy at the store, when the costs of your bills, when the cost of your housing and your rent, when that goes up, that's not a problem. Inflation becomes a problem when workers start demanding a raise to compensate for the increase in the cost of living and saying, you know what, I'm not making as much as I used to. You see this salary I got here? You see this hourly wage I got here? You know, in 2020 money, it might have been a good living, but I'm not making that anymore. Now I'm in the poorhouse. Now I may be homeless, so I need a raise. That's when inflation becomes a problem in the eyes of Jerome Powell. Inflation is great so long as the poors don't catch on to it, so long as they don't realize, or rather, so long as they're not so encumbered that they start to complain to the boss man. Because people demanding higher wages, that's the real inflation. Screw the cost of milk, screw the cost of fuel, screw the cost of housing, screw the cost of beef. Who cares if, sirloins went from, $4 a pound to $10 a pound? So where do we go from here? Well, in December, we go to a 50 basis point rate hike. In January, we go to a 50 basis point rate hike, probably. I don't think that they'll drop so quickly from 50 to 25. If they do, then that means that things are really bad, that they're worse than we know right now, and that the situation is deteriorating rapidly. That's what that would mean. But as of right now, I don't expect that. I think that we'll probably get a couple of months of 50 basis point rate hikes at least, and then, a couple of months of 25 basis point rate hikes, and then the Fed will just kind of go quiet and say, you know what, mission accomplished, everything's fine now. And so all in all, the Fed might, I think, most likely we see the Fed funds rate increase by another 1.5%, 150 basis points total. That is my base case for now. And then at some point, when the situation starts to turn, we're going to see very rapid rate cuts from the Fed. But we're not there yet. We'll have plenty of warning signs before that happens. We're certainly seeing cracks in the broader economy. Obviously, the big tech layoffs have been in the news lately. I don't think that it's going to end with big tech. I think that the layoffs are going to happen across the board. That's only natural when you see rate hikes. All of a sudden, you have all these superfluous workers, and working on things that the companies are only putting money into because money's basically free. If all of a sudden money is less free, or perhaps even unfree, well, then you're going to see those fruitless projects fade away. Unless you're talking about a particularly, ideological corporate regime like the Walt Disney Corporation. I think that Disney is going to run itself into the ground, and its properties will probably be sold off to more reasonable investors at some point in the bankruptcy process, though we're still a long way off from that. I think that they're an exception, though. I don't think that most companies are as self-destructive as the Walt Disney Corporation. Most companies, even your big tech firms like Meta, we now see, are laying off tens of thousands of workers. Amazon, too. Who knows what's going to happen with the stock market? The stock market bears absolutely no relation to the real economy. I think we've known that for a long time. And honestly, I'm skeptical of what relationship it even has to Fed policy. Because if there was a more direct tie between Fed policy and the stock market, as I used to think, stocks should be in the toilet. We should be back below 2020 levels. We should be, the stock market should be on life support. But instead, stocks, while they are down substantially from all-time highs, they're still out in outer space. Like it's not even a questionable thing. Stocks have been overvalued for a very, very long time, using more realistic valuation metrics. That's not changing, and it doesn't appear to be changing. Now, maybe we will see, a big collapse in stocks, and I can try and suss out some kind of relationship between that and whatever else is going on, and try to figure out what is driving the price of stocks. But as far as I'm concerned right now, I think it's just zeitgeist. It's just Wall Street fever. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.